So, a very good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar hosted by Online Rewards and Rewards Consulting, entitled How to Maximise the Value of Employee Recognition. By way of brief background, Online Rewards are a leading global provider of bespoke online reward solutions with offices in the US and the UK. My name's Michael Winters and I'll be your moderator today. I'm the UK Business Development Contact for Online Rewards UK, and my remit also extends across Europe. I've worked in employee reward and recognition sector for over 10 years now across a very broad range of industry sectors. Now, before I introduce today's two speakers, there is a slight apology as it may be somewhat confusing, as everyone you will hear today is called Michael. A popular name, I know, however, somewhat monopolising this webinar today. So on to general housekeeping. The duration of the session is 1 hour, so we intend to finish spot on 3:30 p.m. The format of the webinar will be two presentations, including some interactive poll questions, gauging your opinions along the way. To conclude the webinar, there will be a question and answer session, so do feel free to post questions throughout the webinar in the message feed at the foot of the control panel, and we'll save those questions until the end of the two presentations. So to begin, our two presenters today, first of which is Michael Levy, CEO of Online Rewards, instrumental in delivering over 400 global programs and a respected industry speaker and thought leader. But the actual first of our presenters today is Michael Rose, an independent reward consultant with consultancy roles including Arthur Andersen and KPMG. He also held a number of corporate roles, the last being Director of Reward for Aon. An accomplished speaker and author with no less than 3 books published, including A Guide to NonCash Reward, which is our subject today, i.e. employee recognition. So I'll now pass you over to our first speaker, who would like to begin with an interactive poll question. So please take it away, Michael Rose.
Thanks, Michael. Michael Rose here. Glad everybody's able to join us today. So as Michael said, well, let's do one poll question just to start us off to break up the session. And the first poll question we've got is just to try to gauge some views on what people think about recognition, and really, you know, the materiality of it and for whom it should be most significant. So let's just try that question. So the question we're asking you is, for whom do you think recognition is most important? And you've got some options here. We've got 4 options, as you can see. So you just click on to whichever one of those you think recognition is most important to, and then we'll give the results in a few seconds after everybody's clicked on. So just click on low paid, employees in the service sector, people working in any sector, people, all people if delivered in the right way. What do you think? What's your view? As soon as that's through, we'll put the results up as percentages and see what most people thought. I'm assuming people are on the system. Poll in progress. Good. Off we go. All right. Oh, right. Goodness. Well, I wonder whether that's you know what we're talking about today. So that's the answer everyone came up with. I mean, interestingly, actually, many people think about recognition very much in the top 2 sectors. You know, the low paid and service sector. Those are the places people see stuff. But I certainly think it should be one of the bottom 2. And the reality is, I agree. Actually, if we get it right, it is for everybody. It doesn't have to be badges on lapels. It can be recognition the right way for the right people, and that's what really makes things significant. Okay, great. Well, that's an interesting start. So let's move on now, and let me start to talk through my presentation. So, whilst I've asked what you think recognition is most important, who it's most important to, I haven't really defined recognition. But let me just tell you what I think, you know, recognition is. And this is a quote from the book, actually the book you're going to get hold of. So I see recognition as this, as you can read it, and the critical pieces I've outlined in heavier case in blue. acknowledging or giving special attention. Some examples there. And I think one of the critical things is it's not dependent on achievement against a given target or objectives. And I think, certainly in my experience, people do often get confused between, surprisingly maybe, recognition and incentives. When we're talking about recognition, we are not talking about incentives. They're fundamentally different models. And certainly if we get them confused, as some organizations seem to unintentionally, it can cause some serious problems. And I think we have to really distinguish between the two. As you see at the end of that definition, can be day-to-day, informal or formal. And again, I think people tend to think about recognition as in big recognition programs, but as I'll talk about in a little while, I think it's the day-to-days which is where you can often get the bigger return, and certainly the place to start. But if you find that definition maybe a little bit too long, I think we can distill the essence of what is recognition into a quote from Blanchard and Johnson, the 1 Minute Managers, a book, although it's getting on a bit now, a lot of people know. And they talk about catching people doing something right. And I think that really is a great, simple way of distilling what recognition should be, catching people doing something right. Because interestingly, you know, there's a lot of research that shows that we are hardwired to find the negative in all sorts of situations. That's what we seem to do naturally. It's kind of strange, but that's the way it is. And I'm sure you'll know plenty of people who do operate like that. And in a business sense, you may well have come across managers like that. Maybe like the engineering director who said, my people know when they're doing a good job because I'll tell them if they're not. And so catching people doing something right becomes really the core of what we're talking about. Now, recognition, of course, has been understood as a material component of motivation for a long time, and I'm sure everybody has come across Herzberg and Maslow. Maslow in the 40s was talking about recognition in terms of esteem needs. Herzberg famously, as most people will know, talked about motivators and hygiene factors. And one of the most significant motivators for Herzberg was recognition of performance. And so it's been around for a long time. It's been around as a component of motivation in different guises. But in fact, nowadays, although whatever word we use, we are now typically talking more about engagement than motivation. And whilst the two are different, actually they're very similar. It's around the extent to which people feel motivated to be working in the organization, to the extent to which they are giving discretionary effort, and they're going to go the extra mile because they're engaged with the nature of the organization that they're working with, which may be a number of different components that make that up. And there's now substantial evidence that says engagement is important. Engagement is fundamentally important to organizational success, it seems, and I guess a number of people will have come across the McLeod Review, 2009. If you haven't, you Google it. It's a pretty good source of interesting data that can help you identify opportunities for engagement. And all I've done is extract three little examples of some stuff out of the McLeod Review. So one piece of data shows how people who are engaged seem to correlate highly. People where you've got a high level of engagement in organizations correlate more highly with the high levels of profitability than organizations where engagement is low. Standard Charter had done some great work on employee engagement and seeking correlations in branches between levels of staff engagement and all sorts of metrics. This one I've just given you shows a correlation between bank branches with higher engaged staff and a higher profitability. Interestingly, in the research they found all sorts of other significant metrics, lower error rates, lower staff turnover, higher customer satisfaction, a huge number, and it was quite interesting. And then the last one there is the levels of engagement, people to the extent to which they're going to recommend the company's product compared with those disengaged who don't. So certainly if you want to have ambassadors in the organization, then you're going to get those more readily, it would appear from that data, by having engaged employees. So there are some strong pieces of evidence there, and there's a lot more now, and this really goes way back to Sears Roebuck work that was done 20 years ago, with the employee customer profit chain, and nowadays it seems to me to be pretty well sold on engagement having a significant role to play in organizational success. And the last quote I've put up there, Gallup Q12. If you don't know, it's worth looking up the Gallup Q12. Gallup, of course, I think we probably know, is the survey data organization, very significant global player, and they have a very interesting product which they call the Q12. It is, surprise, surprise, 12 questions, and it's all about trying to identify levels of engagement in organizations. And they've done some huge amount of research that shows the significance of those 12 questions to identify levels of engagement. And interestingly for me, that amongst those 12 is this one question, or this one statement, to which people reply their level of agreement. In the last 7 days, have I received recognition or praise for good work? So Gallup's research is telling them that question, the response to that question, is a material factor in the levels of engagement. And in fact, as it says there in the slide, they found that that's one of the 6 most powerful out of the 12. So it's not just one of the 12, it's even one of the most powerful of the 12. So Gallup's research is certainly suggesting that there's a significant relationship between recognition. And in fact, there's other data, and I've just given one other example here about what drives engagement. And this is a survey that was done, a YouGov survey done in the UK a few years ago. And this survey found that these 5 factors were the key factors that were driving engagement. And I'm not saying, by the way, recognition is the only game in town. It's part of a whole. Clearly, from an HR perspective, we need to look at the totality of everything we do. We need to be holistic. But today we're primarily talking about recognition. And so this is further evidence that says, recognition is a key part of engagement within organizations. And at a very basic level, we can think about, well, what happens if we don't recognize people? And just look at this quote from a piece of research some of my colleagues did at the CIPD a little while back. Recently we were very busy, and a few of us worked a lot of hours to help out, but you didn't get any thanks for it. We were just not appreciated at work. If someone were looking for a job, I wouldn't tell them to get one where I work. And at various levels, I think we can respond to that statement by Susan. Now, she's not asking for a bonus. She's not asking for overtime. She's simply saying, we did this to help out. The organization was in a bit of a mess. We worked a lot of hours to help out. Nobody even thanked us. And as we saw earlier, on the disengaged employees not recommending company products, it suggests from this quote, disengaged employees are less likely to recommend the place as somewhere to work. So, we have got, with disengaged people, certainly people that are not recognized as part of that, the potential to either have ambassadors if we get it right, or detractors if we get it wrong. So the point here is that recognition, I think, is important, and I hope that even though I've just extracted a few examples, given you some evidence to suggest the importance or criticality, I'd say, of recognition within an organization. You're going to get a copy of my book, A Guide to NonCash Reward, and you'll find within that lots of more evidence. But let's turn now to reward and recognition. Let's talk a little bit about that. Now, we often use that phrase, reward and recognition. It often appears now in job titles, so it's the head of reward and recognition. Now, whilst recognition is critically important, as is reward, I'm not always convinced that they sit together quite as neatly as that, and sometimes I think they a bit glibly fall off the tongue. And I sometimes wonder whether it's quite appropriate, which is often the way it's done, that recognition as an activity often and most commonly sits within the reward function. To the extent to which the organization is large enough to have reward, recognition often sits there. But they are fundamentally different, and I'll talk about that in a second now. And it seems to me that by putting recognition within reward and selling it into the organization as part of reward, we start to look at recognition in fundamentally the wrong way. Recognition is not reward, it is different. And by putting it into the reward function, there is the danger that the lens of reward is used, and the approach we end up taking to recognition is much more focused around the reward end. It's looking at the tangible outcomes, the tangible gifts, the cash sometimes, whereas it should be looking at the behavioral change. Now, different organizations look at it in different ways, but I think there's a nice quote that I picked up when I did research my first book a while back, which is from British Airways. And what British Airways said is this, and they had a very neat way of trying to think about this. Rewards about pair compensation, incentives are about meeting targets, and recognition is about saying thank you. Now, I'm not sure whether British Airways still use those three in that way, but they did at the time, and I just think it's really neat a way and a simple way that many organizations could use to think about some of the differentiation between these components. And it is important, I think, to differentiate, and I think finding a simple way to do so can be very important. And let's just dip into those second two, the difference between recognition and incentives. I said at the beginning that it's one of those things that people sometimes get confused. And I think this is quite fundamental again, in that, you know, recognition is all about the message. Recognition is about saying thank you, praising somebody, acknowledging the great thing they've done, acknowledging it maybe publicly. It's the message, it's the thanks. It's the core of recognition as we talk about it, is the thanks. But incentives, on the other hand, if you're incentivizing somebody, then what you're doing is saying, right, you achieve this and then we'll give you that. Now that has to be sufficiently interesting to the individual, and it has to be sufficiently valuable to the individual to likely move them along and enable them, or, you know, to encourage them to do so. So it seems to me that whilst incentives it's likely to have a fairly high value outcome, recognition, on the other hand, because it's primarily about the message, the cost and value in financial terms tends to be low, certainly in comparison to bonus spend and salary spend. And the underlying motivational theories are quite different, expectancy theory and reinforcement theory that you can look at. But I've seen organizations using prizes, if you like, or awards under recognition programs of £1,000 or more. And this actually just seems to get things confusing in terms of what it's about, which I'll talk about in a moment or two. So let's now just move on to you know, the kind of range of recognition, or the recognition journey, or the recognition continuum that we might talk about. You know, where does recognition fit? And I think we can think about recognition programs very much in this kind of informal to formal sense. So really at the informal end, we've got the day-to-day recognition. It isn't hugely more than just saying thank you to people for doing a great job, you know, just almost more, not much more than common courtesy, but maybe, you know, that merges into the kind of low-key, more local approach. So the day-to-day typically is the thanks, and that may be around guidelines to people and maybe setting up some basic infrastructure. As you move over to the right, you're more likely to have some technology support. You may have some programs where people can actually input information into some sort of intranet approach, which acknowledges what people do in a more public way. And then ultimately, of course, you can be moving into the much more formal approach where you might end up with the corporate high profile, you know, employee of the year, the big dinners and all that kind of stuff. And you know, there's a place for all of those, but my experience is that people often think about recognition and think about a recognition program being something on the right-hand side, the corporate. My suggestion is that it's more healthy to think about in recognition from the left-hand side, and then maybe build over towards the right to a place that sort of seems to make sense, rather than start on the right. Because the critical thing is the day-to-day stuff, getting managers and others to understand what good and effective recognition looks like. And that can be achieved through as much training, development and coaching as anything else. And this is one of the reasons why I think recognition can sit perhaps somewhere else to reward. It certainly could sit in a learning and development environment. And it's certainly very interesting that whilst I have spoken to people on recognition, and they typically reward people. When I asked, well, what do you do about training and developing people to understand recognition, they often didn't even know. So it just suggests to me that in some organizations there isn't enough buy-in and between the people running the recognition programs and maybe the learning activities. But whatever we're doing within that continuum, my recommendation always is to use non-cash, and the title of my book was a guide to non-cash reward. And it seems to me if we're using we should be using non-cash for recognition for 4 reasons. One I think is critical, and the other 3 I think are particularly interesting. So I'm going to start just on the top right-hand corner, differentiation. So differentiation, what is that saying? It's saying that because I said recognition is very different from salary or bonus, whilst we use cash for salary and bonus, we should use something different for recognition. Otherwise, it confuses the message. So recognition is about thanks. It's more of a social component than economic. So let me give you this example. If, you may go to a friend for a meal. You may go to friends for a meal. You may choose to take a little something as a gift. You may choose to take some flowers or maybe a bottle of wine or a box of chocolates or something like that. It's fairly common. And it's accepted, and the host or hostess says, thank you very much. Great. Why do you give it? Because you feel you want to reciprocate. You want to say kind of thank you for dinner. It's nice to be here. They're welcoming you, blah-de-blah-de-blah. You wouldn't walk in the door and give them a £10 note. Say, thanks for dinner, here's a tenner. I mean, that's just crazy. We know, gut tells us that's just crazy. Why? It's not an economic transaction. This is about gifts. And to the same extent, we need to differentiate between salary and bonus and recognition. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I've seen the example where you give big potential cash recognition awards. You know what happens? It gets confused both in the minds of the recipient and the typically managers who are giving it, and you end up seeing things like the use of these awards goes up when pay reviews are down. It gets completely confused. The second reason is memory value. To the extent to which you give larger value gifts, people will not show their neighbor their pay slip. They're not going to show them how much they got as bonus. But they'd certainly talk to them about the day's holiday they got, the little weekend away they got, the whatever it happens to be, the camera, the bunch of flowers almost, whatever it is, it's something tangible. You can talk about it and you can remember it, remember the event, remember the action when you look at this stuff. Personal, if you're going to give somebody a small gift as part of the program, then you can make it personal, make it something they really want, some theatre tickets, football tickets, whatever it may be. And certainly larger organisations are likely to have access, and even if you don't do it through your own systems at the moment, you can then get providers to do that. So make something personal. And finally, the perceived value of a gift can be much higher than the cash equivalent. And so it seems to me for those 4 reasons, but differentiation in particular, these are reasons why we should be thinking about non-cash for recognition rather than cash. But in fact, look at what people buy with cash awards anyway. I know the text on the left is a little bit small, but 29% of people from this survey just use cash awards for bills. 15% didn't even receive it. Household items and so on. Now, clearly, with cash, it's got flexibility, but it's certainly not suggesting people were doing very much with the money that would remind them too much of what it was that they did to achieve it. So if we want some memory value, then it would suggest we should do a bit more. Now, if we think about cash awards and gifts, let me give you an example. Let's take a very highly paid person, someone who earns £300,000 a year. Would you give them a £100 bonus? Well, no. I mean, certainly having worked in the city, £100,000 bonuses can also be seen as something of an insult. You're certainly not going to give somebody a £100 bonus. But what happens if instead of the £100, what happens if we convert that to a bottle of champagne and a handwritten note from the chief executive? You know what we've done is we've completely changed that proposition. The £100 bonus for somebody earning £300,000 is an insult. The bottle of champagne and a handwritten note from the chief executive thanking them for what they've done can be very impactful. And I've spoken to many people who've had that sort of thing, you know, the handwritten note from the boss, and they're still carrying around the note with them. You know, it's the letter that carries the impact, and that they wouldn't remember, they couldn't tell you what bonus they got that year, but they sure can tell you that they got that really impactful piece of recognition that has really positively impacted them. So if we're going to do this, and we can, you know, there are lots and lots of ways to approach recognition, but one of the things I think we should just talk about for a second is how do we do it. And I said that, you know, one of the ways to start is on the left-hand side with the day-to-day and getting into the informal, primarily for managers. And, you know, one of the ways to do it is to set up some guidelines. Well, you'll find in the book there's all sorts of stuff about guidelines, but, you know, the sort of things that I think we should be saying are these. You know, if you want to recognize someone, be genuine. If you don't mean it, don't say it. You should be recognizing people as close to the event as you can. So, you know, if you've got a highly bureaucratic process, which means that that would be highly delayed, then that's problematic. Be personal. Use the person's name. Make it specific. Refer to exactly what they did, of course. Just be clear, you know, exactly what it was, and make it public. Be it let others know, you know, team meetings, intranet, whatever it happens to be. So all I've done really is dip into some of the points that I've got in the book to try to both convey my view of the significance of recognition part of engagement, some ideas of different ways to look at recognition. So let me finish my section with one last poll for me, and that's this question. So you're going to get some options here. What do you think, or what do you believe are the most effective motivators for employees? Now, again, it may be slightly loaded based on what I've said, but genuinely, just look down that list. What do you think, based on your experience, what the most effective motivators for employees are out of those 5? So if you just vote on that, please, just click on that, and then we'll put up the responses once we've got that. Okay, click into whichever one of those you think is going to be the most effective motivator. Okay, just coming through. Okay, so what do we got? Praise from immediate manager and cash bonuses. Very interesting. So that's significantly praise from immediate manager, and it's very interesting. And thanks for your views on that, because if we look at a piece of data that McKinsey put through a few years back, what we'll see if we look at that is they found that the top 3, which included praise from immediate manager, absolutely, plus they also talked about leadership attention and chance to lead projects, was equal to or even more effective than cash bonuses or increase in pay or stock. And of course, the really interesting thing there is most of those things at the top don't cost you anything. Now, it's not a nil-sum game, but certainly what we often do in organizations is look at those things at the bottom and say, where do we get, you know, how do we improve people's motivation? And we talk about those things at the bottom. They cost a huge amount of money. For many organizations, it's 70% of the cost. Those things at the top, those softer things, are things that can really make significant impact. Okay, I'm going to finish now, and I'm going to be around for Q&As a bit later. But let me hand over now to the third Michael. This is Michael Levy, who will build from what I've just said and talk about how to bring some of this to life. So over to Michael.
Thank you, Michael Rose. Great to hear that presentation. For some of us, we understand and appreciate the spirit and philosophy, and it's always a refresher to realign around that value proposition of what recognition is. I might be the easiest, Michael, to understand because I'm the Texas version with the Australian accent. So our frame of reference is obviously in support and in agreement with the principles of recognizing the value of recognition as a lever in driving business outcomes. We begin the conversation with you and with clients from a context of, well, what are the business outcomes we're trying to achieve for an organization. And organizations have different objectives as it relates to business outcomes. They also have different existing cultures, different leadership teams, different economic circumstances, different types of employees, and from their relative perspectives are always in some point of motion in time heading in a direction. And that direction's always got to be, we're doing better because we work in an economically driven world, so doing better means ultimately financial. But we all know that in order to get to financial outcomes, there are lots of things we have to be able to do. Quality of the talent being a huge part of it, improving the quality of the talent, managing the cost of that talent, retaining the quality of talent, and aligning and directing that talent towards business objectives for which the organization has set forward. So recognition has a role, as Rosabeth Moss-Cantor well put in her paper. Compensation is a right, recognition is a gift. So we understand all that. So when we think about recognition, at least from a perspective of online rewards, we are asking ourselves, how will we tactically execute recognition in lieu of the fact that recognition is an amorphous concept that varies from organization to organization and isn't something that we can necessarily foist upon an existing culture and expect them immediately to gravitate towards it, to say, thank God that HR just engaged this recognition vendor so we can send gift cards to each other, because that clearly is the foundation of what recognition is. We say, let's look at it from a slightly different perspective first. It may well be that the best solution is to give out as many gift cards as you can, and that causes a alignment of employees' perceptions of what they're being asked to do, and so they do more of it, and so we help drive towards the business outcomes. It's possible, but it shouldn't be the defining aspect. We should say, let's go a bit more slowly. First, let's ask ourselves, what are the objectives of recognition in our organization? You know, what are we asking our people to do, and how do we recognize them if they're doing it? How can we measure it? And how should we then recognize, considering our culture, logistics, financing, and of course, to Michael's point, are we really actually having the effect we want, or have we just sort of created some alternative comp program, which within a year or two will become expected as part of it, and now we're stuck that we've sort of actually increased cost, and we haven't actually got what we said we were going to do, and executive leadership then come back to HR and said, you know, you've been giving out all these gift cards, and that's fantastic, but well, I don't know if that's what we really intended. It wasn't a gift card program. So we begin to ask clients, let's think about this. You know? Secondarily, we have to also recognize that every organization's situation is defined by where they are at some point in time, where your company was and the things they were doing 12 months ago, 24 months ago, 36 months ago were different. In fact, until the engagement surveys started coming out, really people weren't talking about engagement. You know, careful, we've opened the Pandora box. Hi, employee, do you like working here? Do you think we're doing a good job for you? I don't know, certainly in a generation before, that would not have been a concept that anybody could have understood. Either way, we are where we are, right? And this is the competitive world that we live in, and Facebook didn't exist, and it's had an effect, as has Apple and its phones and everything else that we do. So let's look at, you know, I use the term OCM, organizational change management, because we're always at some point of organizational change management, and especially from an HR perspective, we're endlessly sort of turning over, you know, realigning and resetting up, and the business keeps moving and dynamically changing, and you know, HR's got to sort of keep up. But one is, everybody's talking about engagement, okay, the big E. There's a lot more interest in performance-driven initiatives. We know if we don't have leadership support behind HR promoted initiatives, they tend to die on the vine, because HR sets up a great concept and then, you know, the organization operationally says, I don't want to do that because HR told me it was good. But if we got the real leadership involved behind it, then the initiatives drive. There's a lot more discussion around culture and values. Everybody spends a lot of money with consulting firms to tell them what their values are, and now they've got a set of values, and there are bullet points, and they appear on PowerPoint presentations, and sometimes there are posters and emails about it, but okay, so it's a topic. Everybody's moved towards consolidated HR systems, and now there's, too many logins and too many different systems, so we're trying to reduce, right, the number of sort of experiences we're asking an employee to do, or tools an employee is accessing. We want innovation. We're asking our population to say, keep coming up with ideas to keep us ahead of the game so we can be better than everybody else and reduce, and we recognize that innovation doesn't always come from the top, but actually great ideas can come from throughout the organization. We also find we're in a really interesting time with the digital generation and multi-generational populations. And while one assumes that generational populations are always transitioning through the organization, it seems that the distinction between the personality types from the older generation and the younger generation is vaster than ever. Okay, whether that's perceived or not, well, that's a different subject. But it's certainly big, and it's certainly big, probably defined by the technological impact that the recent generations, particularly the last 2 or 3, have had. So they are interacting with each other and their environment, leveraging technology in ways that others haven't. So that's probably creating a more distinct view. But whatever, that's our world. We've got to deal with it. And there's a lot of interest in internal branding. Why? Because there was a long period of time before where people would have careers and they'd stay with one organization, and that sort of changed, and it sort of flip-flopped to the other, which says, you've got to have as many jobs as you can, because there's no chance for getting pay increases unless you keep changing jobs all the time, and you ought to do that. Well, I don't know that everybody sort of agrees with that. I think there's a bit of a trend back, but the trend back is because employers are saying we invest a lot of money in these people, and we don't really want them to move. So internal branding is important. So you'll see how this plays out, but hopefully what you're all looking at here is you're recognizing these as all factors that are at play and in motion in each of your organizations as it pertains and relates to organizational change management. They're things you've got to be aware of, because if you're going to take an initiative, it needs to be within the construct of these. So let's look at what we talk about now, or we discuss with clients in context, taking the ideas of Michael Rose and recognition, and now putting that in a view per the earlier slide of, well, how are we going to actually do something? Okay, execution, 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 execution. The best ideas and the best strategies, whatever, it's the bullet points and the PowerPoint presentations in the C-suite that the frontline employees never see. It looks great, on the PowerPoint presentation. So we're all about the execution. And in this particular sort of presentation that we're sharing and articulating today, we begin to say to clients, look, you've got an anniversary sort of program, maybe a retirement program, recognizing everybody for years of service, 5 years. We can have opinions on the value of it and how much money should be spent. Put that aside. Everybody's going to say, yep, do that. Okay, we're going to say, well, depending on, your organization, type of business they're in, you might have a safety, you might have a wellness, you might have both. Everybody's nodding, you've got some of those. You've got some education and training things going on. You've got to educate the people, you've got to train them. Some of them are compulsory, some of them are non-compulsory, very important. Yep, okay, good. Some organizations are pushing around diversity. What you're doing for your diversity program? We want a diverse employee population. We want them to contribute to each other. It's a very diverse population we live in. We love idea innovation. We want that. Hey, we want volunteer programs because we want to identify, and we think that that builds good community and also facilitates. And of course, we have performance incentives. So all of you on the call, just about 100% guaranteed, are doing most of those things in some combination. And I'm hoping you've all got organized handbooks for it too, because you need to have guides just for the employees to understand what your programs all are and what they're all trying to do. Right? Otherwise, you have the situation of which I've asked many clients about it. I've sat in meetings with HR teams, and when I probe them on their programs, ask them some questions, some of them actually sit up in HR and go, I didn't know we had that. I just said, really? Is that, oh, who manages that program? And they'll go, oh, you know, Joni, Committee 7, you know, she does that with that. Oh, yes, I know all that. Yes, I'm sort of picturing it. They're having committee meetings, getting together regularly to talk about these things, and then they're engaging some internal marketing resources, and they're pulling this direction. And then you've got the other folks on the safety side, and they're pulling over here. Then you've got the people in the wellness side, they're pulling over here. Then someone's got some recognition program where they're selling pins and badges and, you know, things. They're pulling over there. And you can see where I'm going in the point, and it's obvious, and it's where we all are. So don't think that if you're nodding, going, I know where you're going with this point, that you're in a unique situation. It's where we are, because we're always moving forward. It's the wonder of humanity and this great thing that we're continuously evolving and turning, and the machine is moving. And I'm saying, right, we're sort of at the point now where we've got to ask a question: how do these programs interconnect around the business objectives, the values and mission of the organization? And do they have interplay, and are they complementing each other to create an environment in which an employee, not an HR person, an employee comes to the business and goes, I understand the things you're asking me to do. I know what the business objectives are. I can relate to the mission and values, and you're doing it well. What a great culture. You're doing it well, execution. What a great culture. I understand it, and I can relate it. And that's where everybody needs to go. This slide needs to be sort of at the C-suite going, we need to bring our programs together. They interplay with each other. They complement each other if we design them correctly. And there's questions around whether there should be that many committees really pulling all these things together, or if they are, because we like to have, you know, committees doing things because that's the nature of our organization, fine, but at least have some common representation across the committees. For these programs, cost money, take time, draw emotional energy from the employee participating in it, and such they must work together to create some harmonious overarching experience. And that experience should be, I'm an employee, I understand the mission, values, and business objectives, and they're doing it well. What a great culture. This is a good culture organization. I'm staying. Right, so hopefully that's meaningful. Now I'm going to show some examples of just seeing people starting to get creative, because execution is everything, right? The employee's experience in these strategic initiatives that we're talking about are defined by the actual tactical execution. To Michael's example, was it a bottle of champagne that was presented to you or something else? Because that's what the thing is at the end of the day. And I don't mean it was the reward. I mean, however they interacted with the letter and the note and the bottle of the champagne, or it was a gift, or it was, that's what they see. It's what do we show in front of them? What thing are they interacting with? How does it sort of touch them in some way so they can go home at the end of the day and they can say to their partner, this is what happened today, it was great. So it's the this is what happened that counts, right? Not the bullet point description of it. It's the this is what happened today. All right, so let's have a look at how, you know, some people we know have aligned. And I'm certainly not trying to say in any of this, hey, you know, we're the best. And there are people who can do these things. We're really great, of course. Right? We're the experts at the bespoke version. But the points I'm trying to share in looking at these examples is saying, isn't it clever some of the things they've done? Because you can do some of these things. All right, so we're in a retail world. There's 250,000 employees. There's 1,000 different locations. So you've got to imagine all the varieties of the different types of people involved in the different touch points and the, you know, different levels of technology and the generation, etc. So they've brought all these soft elements together. You know, these combination of recognition and performance-based elements. Here we've got in the top left corner this construct of there's anniversaries and there's birthdays and people being able to sort of messaging each other. There's a concept of telling stories and capturing information about employees who've done great things. Then workflow processes that allow people to comment on stories and share stories and using it as a coaching tool. There's very informal recognition where people are just communicating with each other. You've got to do these things because if any of you have got anybody under the age of 25, either as an employee or part of your family, you know, they're little screens. You can see them. They're almost inside their head. You know, they're right in front of them. That's what they're doing. Well, so we've got to facilitate that. But we want to facilitate it not so it's just haphazard. We still want to control it somewhat. You know, we want to direct it. What are they communicating to each other about? It's not supposed to be a communication tool where it's like chat. It's supposed to be around the company, right? And then post information about it and let people like it because they're used to that. Or find stories if you're a manager and using as coaching goals, or port the information into your talent development system so that as it comes to review time, you've got some substance, you know, in front of the manager that says, oh, I see you've been recognized by these people, or stories were told about you. So this is showing how an organization, right, who had the haphazard programs all over the place over time, has now brought them together to come under a common umbrella. And it's not about promoting gift cards, right, and selling gift cards. There's nothing about actual tangible rewards that's present, visible. There is stuff in there, and there's incentives because it has a role, and there are rewards, and they have a role too. Interestingly, they do a lot of, you know, custom branded merchandise, but high-end stuff. So there's a nice sort of segue of how you can, you know, cross it. Now we're getting into performance-based elements, right? Not far from the recognition activities is now incentives. So here's now the interplay between recognition, you know, have you been spotted recently doing great things, and a performance attribute. Performance attribute being, well, I want you to do this thing, I want you to reach a target, I want you to get to a goal. To bringing leadership and executive leadership support involved. Here's a dashboard for executive managers showing here's where recognition activities are happening in the organization so that you now as executive leadership can feel connected to it. And if you feel connected to it, then you're likely to support it and encourage it, and you'll begin to justify a demonstrated ROI. Aha, this is working. I can see there's lots of activities in my business unit. I can see how I can make this come to life. To aligning with values and trying to make values interesting. This is a food service company, probably 120,000 employees. I know it's not a name that you might recognize, but it's a significant name in the United States. And here trying to say our values of fun and camaraderie and respect and integrity and excellence and connection, values that would of course be relevant to a employee at a food service business. So here they're bringing it to life and trying to make it fun for them. Gamification and winning prizes in there makes perfect sense for that kind of audience and that kind of atmosphere. Here we've got a program where they're aligning with around wellness and asking participants to meet thresholds across a variety of pillars: fitness, nutrition, prevention, emotional well-being. Do elements of all, and you will reach certain thresholds. And what's the prize? PTO. That's pretty meaningful for some parts of the population, certainly culturally appropriate for that organization. Now we're bringing into this program, again, in addition to the recognition and the celebrations, idea submission. Send us your suggestions. Right? Let us know how you think we can improve things. They also have actually an employee referral program built into it too. So again, combining is the message I'm sharing, and the execution. Here we're seeing sites where we're bringing in the social media aspects of you can post videos and photos and sound bites, and others can then comment, and there can be streams of stories associated with what did everybody who was involved in that particular project happen to say. In this particular execution, employees, a story gets a certain number of likes, it automatically elevates and notifies HR, whether corporate HR or divisional, regional HR, and says, you ought to have a look at this story, it's gotten more than 50 likes. So again, playing to that generation, bringing it to life, controlled by HR, viewed by HR, then getting notifications on, okay, what are they all reacting to? What are they all interested in? Here we're seeing departmental scorecards and KPI performance in conjunction with recognition activities. I've jumped ahead one. So our message is, when you're thinking about recognition, begin to ask yourself, well, how many forms of it do we have in the organization? How many other programs may be non-comp related? Okay, compensation, that's fine, and annual reviews, and that's fine, and career development, that's fine. That sits to Michael's earlier comment on in the rewards area. And then there's all the other things that the organization is doing. How do we begin to align them so they're complementary? How are we executing them? How can we do things without perhaps spending money compensation, but more cleverly design and execute our programs so that the organization looks to HR and not says, well, you're sort of pushing this program. How do we create ground roots level support by meeting the employee population where they are, whether that be management or the front line, and provide them with tools by which recognition begins to feel more natural and is easier. And from that position and vantage point, then what we'll share with you, and what we've seen with our clients who've been doing this 13 years, is the programs will begin to grow and evolve inside the organization. They will begin to form their own structure and format. And from there, you will begin to get maximal participation rates and maximal then return on investment. So a quick question then says, if given a few options and what I've articulated, meaning in an integrated approach, how would you best describe where you're at in the process, which is, some organizations are finding that recognition is just not part of the company culture. It's maybe a legacy of people should be happy that they've worked here, to it's something we do, but we're not really sure if we're doing it particularly well or not. Or we're not getting any support by leadership, so we're trying in HR and we're doing it, but nobody seems to care except for us in HR that it's a valuable tool. To, is recognition something that's there, but it doesn't really align with overall company values? It's become this sort of alt comp program where we're sending out gift cards and that's sort of it. Or it's something we do great and we're doing it well, and some of the examples that I've shown might be just nice reinforcement. So I thought that might be a relevant perspective to share at the end. And with that, I'll pass it back. Thank you very much, all of you, for your time and interest this morning. And hopefully the three Michaels have helped you today.
Thanks very much. The two other Michaels, Michael Rose, Michael Levy. So we've just got the quick poll results there. And we've only got about 5 minutes left now. So we're going to move on to the final phase of the webinar, the question and answer session. So if anyone has any questions not yet submitted, can you please type them onto the question or chat feed, and we'll try and process them as quickly as we can. We had a few questions submitted prior to the session, but I noticed there's one from Rob Allen, and seeing that it's relevant to the last presentation, this is for Michael Levy. Rob asks, how do the Macy's shop floor employees see these online systems, i.e. those that don't use a computer? Michael?
Apologize. Thanks, Rob. Great question. We've been working with Macy's for 8 years, so we've seen things change over that period of time, as we all have noticed, mainly the presence of smartphones. In the early days, they were independent, freestanding programs, so people were accessing it from home, or if they had kiosks throughout the retail environment, from the kiosks. What we've seen over the period is, as the program became more relevant to the organization, i.e. leadership got involved and said this program's obviously doing well, so we want to promote it, they provided us with a means by which we could access, or by which the employees could access the program through their POS systems. Granted, they were internet-based POS systems, so they had the capacity to get to the internet. Simultaneously, we've seen tablets being deployed over time through parts of the organization. I think they're probably at a director or manager level, so they're there in the stores. But the most, I think, interesting part is the recognition program's access points have predominantly been via mobile devices, and that the employees take the lead themselves and use their own device to go and access it, because these are all, mobile-based devices, to input stories. You don't see all the functionality when you're using the mobile device, but you see parts of the functionality, that's relevant for telling stories and sharing stories and seeing if you're recognized or not.
Okay, thanks, Michael. That's great. Another question from Julie Hall this time, and I'll put this one to Michael Rose first of all. What's your view about asking staff, for example, as part of an away day, what they would actually like to have in way of recognition?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. As a general principle, I think it's good to ask people, but there's some interesting stuff that, if you do ask, you get a whole range of different answers. It's not necessarily something you'll be able to do. So as long as you're managing expectations, I've certainly used this sort of approach. Interestingly, the thing you often get is time. People often talk about a day off as a piece of recognition, but I think it's fine. As long as it's managed carefully, as long as you're managing expectations, get some ideas for what people see, what people think. The thing that I think is important though is to make sure that you've got the emphasis right, which is, if the way the question is posed, it's all around, what do you want, as in we're going to deliver you something tangible, then of course it's kind of perhaps, if you're not careful, refocusing, as I said earlier, away from what I think the core is about that, whereas it's more about the praise. But yeah, why not? I think it's a good idea.
Michael Levy, would you like to add anything to that?
No, we've seen clients do that and have it been successful, meaning that they got a good response from the employees and were obviously able to execute at some capacity. I think it's probably a good idea to consider presenting them with some options and alternatives that you think would be tactically executable, so it becomes a multiple choice response saying, hey, I still want your input. I can't do everything because the last are unrealistic things we know, but of these things, what would you like? So consider how you might execute it.
Okay, here's another one. How can you measure the actual effectiveness of recognition programs? Michael Rose again?
Well, I think the main approach that most people tend to use is look at recognition as it features in part of your engagement survey or attitude survey, whatever it is you do, and certainly that's most commonly the sort of thing that's triggered people to think about recognition. And I've certainly seen organisations where they've ended up with start with a very low score in their surveys, and they put in a whole load of different kind of approaches to recognition, training managers and so on and so forth, and watch the score increase, i.e. they can see that the changes they have made have had a positive impact on what people are saying about recognition. I think there's a danger if you just measure sort of recognition events, because there's a danger that you can simply encourage people to do recognition when it's not particularly valid. What you need is people who genuinely understand the significance and the importance, give them plenty of opportunities and infrastructure, and measure to the extent to which it seems to have impact going through the organisation.
Thanks, Michael. Michael Levy, if you'd like to respond quickly, because our time's nearly up.
Sure. So I think that's a great question, and certainly something where we're pushing the boundaries with our clients, and that is to say we can see with a well thought through program and aligning it with business objectives, we can begin to say, well, let's see activities in the program itself, so utilization rates of the program as a lead indicator. Then data points would be a survey to see if we're seeing correlations between survey responses and activity in the program. So if we're seeing low levels of activity, low responses, high levels of activity, high level of responses. And then a third variable might be, let's just say sales. Are we seeing a positive correlation between activities in the program, a engagement score, and a business outcome? And if so, then we're seeing that these are likely relative indicators that are supporting each other, and we'll be looking for examples of where we can show, okay, and here's the opposite may be true. So we're looking to align recognition activities with business goals and objectives, then track the data points, of which again engagement surveys being relevant, but go to the business outcomes so that we've got an argument and a business case to say to leadership, hey, look what we're doing, we're investing in this particular area, this is how it's being used by the organization, and these are the relative results in that part of the organization that's high users versus low users. So we're truly painting a picture. It's never one-to-one, but there's certainly very strong indicators in supporting of each other in terms of some of the way we've done our data analytics.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So our time is up. So on behalf of Online Rewards, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy calendars for their attendance today. And we hope you found the content both informative and thought-provoking. Please feel free to contact us with any further questions or queries arising out of today's session. Michael Rose's book, A Guide to NonCash Reward, will be forwarded to each of you in the very near future, and I, Michael Winters, will be making direct contact for some feedback on the webinar. So there's nothing further to say apart from wishing you all a very successful 2016, and goodbye for now.